The cold wind drifted through the narrow alleyways of Kyoto, slipping between the wooden houses and stirring the dry autumn leaves at my feet. The lingering scent of rain mixed with the distant smell of roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor. I had envisioned a peaceful morning with just my camera and the golden glow of the season reflecting in the temple ponds. However, life had different plans for me. Suddenly, a faint sound disrupted the quiet, a series of fragile cries that barely pierced the breeze. My heart raced as I turned toward the source of the noise. It came from behind a stack of old wooden crates, partially concealed next to a rusty bicycle in the shadows. The cries seemed to hold both exhaustion and urgency, almost like tiny voices asking for help. I cautiously approached, crouching down to move a damp, tattered piece of cardboard. As my fingers brushed against it, a mix of damp fur and decay struck my senses. Then I caught sight of them. 3 tiny kittens, no bigger than my palm, were huddled together, their fur matted from the cold. They pressed against their mother, a frail white cat whose body appeared alarmingly thin. Her ribs were visible beneath her patchy fur, and her breaths were shallow. A soft exhale escaped her lips, barely audible over the wind. My heart sank. She was alive, but just barely. I took a deep breath. I had never rescued an animal before, and had never encountered a situation like this. Yet, seeing those little creatures shivering against their mother stirred something within me. I realized I couldn't just walk away. The alley was damp, and the ground was slick from last night's rain. The air was thick with the musty scent of mildew and rust, while the faint sound of distant traffic felt far removed from this neglected corner of the city. I knelt beside this small family, my hands hovering just above them, uncertain about what to do next. The kittens whimpered softly, their small bodies trembling with each breath. Their mother, Yuki, lay still, her cloudy eyes half open, seemingly looking past me as if she had surrendered to her fate. I paused. Would she lash out if I touched her kittens? Even in her weakened condition, a mother's protective instincts could be strong. But she didn't move, as though she had already accepted whatever was to come. I took a deep breath and reached out to touch one of the kittens, Suta, the smallest of the 3. He flinched slightly but stayed still. His fur felt damp and chilling to the touch. A wave of urgency washed over me. If I didn't act soon, these kittens might not survive. I scanned the alley for help but found it deserted. There were no signs of anyone, just me and these vulnerable little lives hanging on by a thread. I took a moment to compose myself, then unzipped my jacket and carefully tucked the kittens inside, feeling their faint warmth against my chest. Next, I reached for Yuki. As soon as my hands touched her fragile body, she let out a soft, raspy breath. "Hold on, I've got you," I whispered gently. Cradling Yuki in my arms, I realized just how delicate she was. She felt alarmingly light, almost as if she were made of thin paper. Her heartbeat was weak but steady against my palm. Meanwhile, the other kittens squirmed inside my jacket, their tiny claws kneading the fabric, but they didn't have the strength to struggle. I stood up, shielding them from the cold wind, and hurried toward the only place that came to mind, Hina Tanaka's clinic. Hina was a veterinary student who ran a small, unofficial shelter at her home. I didn't know her well, but my sister Mika often praised her commitment to stray animals. If anyone could help, it would surely be her. When I finally reached her door, my arms throbbed from holding the kitten so tightly. I knocked a couple of times, and Hina opened the door, blinking in surprise at my soaked clothes and the urgency in my expression. "What happened?" she asked, instinctively reaching for the kittens. "I found them in an alley," I managed to say. "Their mother, she's not doing well." Hina's expression tightened as she took Yuki from my hands, her fingers quickly checking for any signs of life. A frown crossed her lips. "She's in critical condition, malnourished, likely sick. The kittens, they're weak, but there might still be hope." I swallowed hard, hanging on to that tiny flicker of hope. It was enough to keep me standing, even as doubt crept in. Could we be too late? Hina acted swiftly. She placed Yuki on a soft towel and started examining her vitals, while I gently set the kittens down in a makeshift box lined with a heating pad. They huddled together, their fragile bodies hardly moving as warmth began to seep into them. I watched anxiously as Hina placed the stethoscope against Yuki's chest. Her expression tightened. "Her breathing is weak. We need to stabilize her quickly." She paused to grab a syringe. I can give her fluids, but she requires a proper clinic. She needs more than the basics, Renji. I clenched my jaw. Can you take her there? She hesitated. There's an issue. The animal hospital won't accept an unregistered stray unless we agree to take financial responsibility. Given her condition, treatment will be costly. A wave of dread washed over me. The thought of money hadn't crossed my mind. I barely had enough savings to get by. How could I pay for an emergency vet bill? Before I could reply, a faint, raspy sound pierced the silence. It was Yukiki. Her fragile body quivered slightly, and a strained, wheezing meow escaped her. Hina's fingers hovered nervously. She's getting worse. We don't have time to think. I glanced at the kittens huddled together, then back at their mother. Leaving now would mean she wouldn't survive. But if I stayed, I took a deep breath. What do I need to do? The atmosphere in Hina's small clinic felt heavy with urgency, the soft hum of the overhead light barely masking the shallow, labored breaths coming from Yuki. The kittens, though still weak, stirred slightly under the warmth of the heating pad, their tiny paws twitching as if searching for the mother who couldn't comfort them anymore. Hina moved quickly, preparing an IV drip with skill, but I saw the seriousness in her eyes, the professional understanding that she had encountered many situations like this, and she knew when the chances were slim. I swallowed hard, fully aware that I had stepped into a situation that was larger than I had anticipated. She continued working, her voice calm yet urgent. We need to stabilize her first. Fluids can help, but she requires proper treatment, nutrients, tests, medication. If there's an infection, it might already be too late. Her eyes met mine briefly, searching for an answer I didn't have. You need to decide now. If you can't cover the costs, we won't be able to get her admitted. I could feel my heartbeat echoing in my ears, a constant reminder of how serious the situation was. I had come here instinctively, drawn by the desperate cries from a narrow alley where 3 vulnerable kittens clung to their mother, who was barely hanging on. This felt different. This was urgent and couldn't be overlooked. I had never owned a pet or cared for another life before, yet here I stood, facing a choice I hadn't anticipated. My hands tensed at my sides as I looked at Yuki again, her frail body taking uneven, shallow breaths. The spark of life within her was faint, clinging on, but she was still fighting. Mika's words echoed in my mind, reminders from childhood when we fed strays behind our old home. You can't save them all, Renji, but the ones you can, you have to try. I turned my gaze to Hina, my mind made up even as the gravity of it filled my thoughts. Do what you need to do. I'll figure it out. She paused, studying me for a moment. The tension in her shoulders eased a little before she nodded. Without another word, she returned to Yuki, adjusting the IV drip with precise, practiced movements. I took a deep breath, trying to relax my hands as I stepped closer to the kittens, their tiny bodies nestled together, oblivious to the turmoil surrounding them. I had no clear plan for what to do next, no certainty that I could keep the promise I just made. But as I gently stroked the smallest kitten's head, feeling the warmth of its fragile life, I knew one thing for sure. I was already too far in to turn back now. The clinic smelled of antiseptic mixed with a hint of warmth, a sense of life filling the air as the heating pads slowly infused the kittens with the strength they had nearly lost. Hina worked with focused determination, adjusting the IV line and checking Yuki's weakened pulse. Her hands moved confidently, even amid the unspoken tension. I stayed close to the kittens, resting my hands near them, as if my presence alone could help anchor them to this world. Their tiny chests rose and fell with irregular rhythms. Though their bodies quivered, the frantic mewing had softened as exhaustion took over their fear. Then, the quiet was broken as the door creaked open, interrupting the stillness. Takumi Ishida walked in, his face showing worry and his coat a bit damp from the cool air outside. He was a familiar figure in our town, known for his cozy bookstore filled with forgotten tales, but today he seemed different. His brow was furrowed, and he moved with a tension I hadn't seen before as he looked around. When his gaze landed on Yuki, the shift in his expression felt deeper than mere sympathy. I had a feeling she wouldn't be around much longer, he said softly, mostly to himself. She used to hang out near the shop, just beyond the streetlights. She never let me get too close, but she always came back. His voice carried a rough edge, tinged with regret as he glanced at the kittens. They must be hers. Hina stood up, wiping her hands on her scrubs. Exhaustion showed in her movements. She's in really bad shape. If she pulls through, it'll be nothing short of a miracle. Renji's handling her care, but we'll need more than luck to get through the next few days. Takumi took a slow breath, the kind that suggests he's weighing whether to share something important. His steady gaze met mine before he spoke. You need to know something about her. After a brief pause, he added, she wasn't always a stray. His words hit me like stones sinking in water, their weight unsettling and unexpected. Yuki had once belonged to someone who either lost her or left her behind. This meant there was a story in her past that I hadn't considered, one that might change everything I thought I knew. The air felt heavier as Takumi's revelation settled between us. Knowing that Yuki wasn't always alone transformed my view of her fragile state from one of inevitable fate to something that felt intentional, something that happened for a reason. I looked at her fragile body, her ears barely twitching as Hina adjusted the IV. I couldn't help but wonder about her life before this moment. Had she been cherished? Had someone named her gently during quiet nights, allowing her to nestle against them? Or had she been left behind, like so many others, to struggle in a world that often offers little hope? Takumi spoke again, his tone quiet but steady. If she had an owner, they either didn't care enough to search for her, or they chose to leave her behind. He sighed and rubbed his face, as if trying to wipe away the weight of the situation. This town has seen many abandoned pets before. People move away or change their minds, and the pets are left without a choice in the matter. I swallowed hard, my gaze fixed on the kittens curled together, completely unaware of the burdens their mother had faced. What do we do now? I asked, aware that my question reached far beyond just this moment and the 4 little lives in front of me. I realized I wasn't sure if I could shoulder the consequences of someone else's decisions. The impact of Takumi's words hung in the air, but before I could gather my thoughts, I heard Hina curse softly. I turned just in time to see Yuki's frail body shake, her back arching slightly before she slumped, as though her last thread of life was starting to fray. The heart monitor began to flicker erratically. Hina sprang into action, adjusting the IV and pressing her fingers against Yuki's fragile chest. My heart raced, and everything else faded around me, leaving only the urgent beeps of the monitor and the soft sounds of the kittens shifting, their tiny bodies sensing the gravity of the moment. She's crashing, Hina murmured, her words almost lost in her movement. Her hands moved with purpose, steady even as the tension filled the room. Come on, girl, not yet. In that moment, I felt completely helpless. I watched as Hina injected something into the IV line, her jaw set and focus unwavering. Takumi stood nearby, unusually quiet, his expression unreadable. Seconds dragged on, stretching painfully before Yuki's body shuddered and then fell still. An oppressive silence enveloped the room. And then, just a breath. Weak, shallow, but still there. Hina exhaled, her shoulders relaxing slightly, though the worry on her face remained. She's holding on, she said softly, as if encouraging Yuki to keep fighting. But then she looked directly at me, her expression serious. We need to discover where she came from. If she had an owner, there might be more to this than we realize. Takumi, who had been silent until now, shifted his weight, his eyes revealing a depth of thought I couldn't quite understand. There is, he said, letting out a sigh. I didn't want to mention it until I was certain, but I think I know who she belonged to. The atmosphere in the room felt charged, anticipation tightening within me. Whatever Takumi was about to share would shift everything for us. He paused, his fingers lightly grazing his coat sleeve, as if considering the burden of the truth he was ready to reveal. The room was quiet, filled only with the rhythmic beeping of Yuki's heart monitor and the soft, uneven breaths of the kittens nestled under the warmth of the heating pad. Hina, crouched next to the frail mother cat, fixed her eyes on Takumi, waiting for him to begin. It was clear he felt uncertain about where to start. She belonged to a woman named Asami, he finally said, his voice lower, as if the name held a memory best kept hidden. She lived here a few years ago in a small apartment above the old tailor shop by the station. As far as I know, she mostly kept to herself, but that cat was always by her side, a beautiful white cat, just like Yuki. He pointed toward Yuki, his expression hard to read. Then one day, Asami vanished. No goodbye, no new address. People thought she might have moved away or returned to her family. But the cat, she was left behind. A chill ran down my spine. Abandoned. Left to survive in a city that had long forgotten those it had cast aside. I glanced at Yuki, her fragile frame still, her breath shallow but steady. She had endured so much, navigating the streets, surviving against the odds, all while carrying life within her. Hina shifted back on her heels, letting out a soft sigh. If she had an owner, we should try to find her. Maybe she wants her back. Before she could finish, Takumi shook his head. She's not coming back, he said matter-of-factly. And even if she did, do you really think someone who abandoned her would suddenly want her again? His tone held no anger, just a resolute understanding of the difficult side of human behavior. I focused on Yuki, feeling a tightness in my throat. The weight of responsibility felt heavier now. This was no longer just about rescuing her. It had become a crucial decision, one that I had to face whether I wanted to or not. The atmosphere in the room shifted, becoming denser, as if the truth Takumi shared thickened the air around us. Yuki's past was not just a sad tale. It was a reality marked by abandonment, a story etched into the very fabric of her being. I kept thinking she wasn't simply a stray by circumstance. Someone had chosen to leave her behind, to forget about her. This thought troubled me deeply, like an ache that settled in my chest. The kittens shifted, their tiny bodies huddling together, driven by a natural urge to survive. They had no idea of the heavy emotions weighing down the adults around them. All they understood was warmth, the soothing sounds of life, and the soft whispers drifting above them. Hina spoke, her tone steady but hinting at a need to defend her position. We can't jump to conclusions about Yuki's abandonment, she said, glancing at Takumi with a furrowed brow. People face tough situations. Perhaps she didn't have any other choice. Takumi scoffed, shaking his head. There's always a choice, he replied, crossing his arms. She didn't leave a note or ask for help. She just disappeared. That doesn't happen by accident. I felt the weight of their words. It seemed like the very air was squeezing in around me. The real issue wasn't whether her leaving was a mistake. It was about what to do next. Hina must have sensed my turmoil as her voice softened. Renji, I know this is a lot to take in, but what do you want to do? What did I really want? I had never been someone who saw an abandoned animal and immediately thought of bringing it home. I hadn't planned for this moment, finding myself torn between what felt like a duty and a fog of uncertainty. Yet, when I looked at Yuki, so fragile, and her 3 kittens, blissfully unaware of how precarious their situation was, the thought of walking away, of leaving them to whatever fate awaited, felt unbearable. Still, fear nagged at me, raising questions I wasn't ready to face. What if Yuki didn't make it? What if the kittens didn't survive? What if I wasn't enough to help them? The clock ticked steadily, marking each moment, every breath, each one an opportunity to turn and leave. But I knew. Even before I spoke, I felt it within me. I'm not leaving them. My voice came out stronger than I expected. Whatever happens, I'll find a way. Takumi regarded me, his expression unreadable, before nodding slowly. Hina let out a breath, as though she had been holding it in for far too long. Yuki lay quietly, unaware that a significant choice had just been made for her. Her life, whatever was left of it, was now in the hands of others. Yet this choice was just the start. Now I had to figure out how to navigate this new reality. The weight of this decision settled heavily in my chest. It felt final and unchangeable, yet the implications were just beginning to unfold. I had made my commitments, and while I wouldn't take back my words, I was only beginning to grasp what they truly meant. The sense of responsibility was reaching into areas of my life I had never anticipated. It felt daunting, not just because I was taking care of 4 vulnerable lives, but because I realized I had stepped into something much larger than myself. Hina was already at work, moving efficiently to support Yuki. She was determined to give this fragile mother a chance to see another day. Takumi lingered by the door, his expression unreadable, but his fingers nervously tapping against his sleeve suggested he was deep in thought. Something about his stance made me wonder if he had expected me to turn away. "You know this isn't just about money, right?" he said, his voice low. There was an edge to his tone. It wasn't quite skepticism, but it lacked encouragement too. It's not only vet bills and food, you're making a commitment to them, for however long they need you. I understood the real question behind his words. Are you sure about this? Was I sure? Not really. But did that uncertainty matter? I know, I replied, hoping my voice sounded steadier than I felt. The full meaning of those words hadn't truly sunk in yet. I'm not backing down. Takumi let out a sharp breath, a mix of amusement and disbelief. Okay then, he mumbled, shaking his head as if he'd seen too many people like me, those who thought they could change the world without realizing the depth of what they were stepping into. Hina, still focused on Yuki, glanced up briefly. She's stable for now, she said, but it's too soon to know for sure. The next few days will be crucial. We will have to bottle feed the kittens until she gains strength. And if she doesn't make it... Her voice trailed off, but I felt the unspoken weight of her words. The responsibility wouldn't end with Yuki. The kittens would still rely on me. I looked down at them, their tiny bodies huddled together, and a wave of fear washed over me. Not just for their sake, but for my own. What if I wasn't enough? What if I let them down? Once a choice is made, there's no going back. I was committed now, and I had to see it through. I'll do whatever it takes, I declared, trying to sound confident, even though I felt shaky inside. In that moment, everything changed. My life was no longer mine alone. The night was long and quiet, the stillness almost palpable, filled with a sense of waiting and uncertainty that seemed to seep into every corner of the room. Yuki lay still, her breathing shallow, giving off the impression that she could vanish if I blinked. The kittens, cozy on the heating pad, moved occasionally, their little paws twitching with instinctive restlessness. They were hungry and needed her, but whether she would still be there for them in the morning was a heavy question hanging in the air. I sat in a worn chair next to the exam table, fingers intertwined, staring blankly. I kept reminding myself that I had made my choice and would stay. But as time slipped by, fatigue set in, and the weight of responsibility pressed down on me. Fear began to creep in. I had jumped in without thinking, driven by instinct. But what if I was mistaken? Takumi had left earlier, his expression hard to read, and he had spoken briefly, but there was a hint of respect in his tone. Now Hina was still here, quietly moving between Yuki and the kittens, her actions efficient and confident, as if she was a seasoned pro. She hadn't said much since I made my decision, but now, while adjusting the IV fluids, she looked at me and softened her voice slightly. "You can still walk away," she said gently. "No one would blame you." Her words lingered between us, carrying an understanding. I could leave. I could convince myself I had done enough by getting them this far. I could step outside, close the door, and return to my previous life, simple and untouched by the responsibility of these 4 vulnerable lives. When I looked at Yuki, I noticed how her ears flicked slightly, as if she was holding on. The kittens snuggled against each other for warmth, relying on something larger than themselves. In that moment, I realized I had already made up my mind. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, even though fatigue was settling deep within me. Hina paused to study me, then nodded, as if she had been waiting for my assurance. "Good," she said softly, turning her focus back to Yuki, "because this isn't over yet." As I sat there listening to the gentle hum of machines and the soft breaths of the kittens, I could feel the uncertain rhythm of Yuki's life clinging to hope. Hina was right. This was just the beginning. The first light of dawn filtered through the clinic window, casting warm golden streaks across the floor. This kind of light softened the harshness of the sterile environment. I hadn't slept all night. My body ached from being hunched in the same position, and my limbs felt stiff, but I couldn't bring myself to move. The night had been so fragile, each moment stretched out as I watched Yuki. Every shallow breath she took felt like it might be her last. Hina had checked on her regularly, her expression calm but distant. I could sense the tension in her jaw, and it was clear that she didn't want to face the possibility we both dreaded. If Yuki didn't survive the night, there would be nothing more we could do. But as the morning light filled the room, something changed. Yuki stirred just a little, her front paw twitched, and her whiskers moved slightly. It was a small sign, but it sent a rush of hope through me. I leaned forward, breathless, as I saw her ears flicker again and slowly her eyes opened. Though they were unfocused, I could see life in her eyes. Weak, but still life. Hina gasped beside me, springing into action. "She's responding," she whispered, a note of disbelief in her voice. "She's actually responding." As I looked down at this cat who had been so close to losing everything just hours earlier, I felt a swell of relief. It hit me harder than I expected, and I felt a knot form in my throat as my shoulders relaxed. I didn't realize how much I had prepared myself for the worst, but the situation was still unfolding. Hina placed her hand on my shoulder, her tone gentle. "She's not out of the woods yet, Renji. This is just the beginning. She will need ongoing care. A vet visit isn't enough." She paused before continuing. "It's going to be a long journey. Are you sure you're ready for that?" I glanced at Yuki, seeing the tiny kittens nestled beside her, blissfully unaware of what their mother had just endured. I recalled the alley, the dampness, the cold, how the little ones had clung to her, even when she had nothing left to give. I had never been certain, not from the start. But as I reached out and brushed my fingers along Yuki's fur, feeling the faint warmth of life beneath her skin, I realized turning back was not an option. "I'm not sure if I'm ready," I admitted, my voice softer, more honest. "But I won't leave her." Hina watched me for a moment, then nodded, a small smile forming gently on her lips. "Then let's get started." Just like that, the story I thought had concluded in the alley that night, the moment I discovered 3 vulnerable kittens huddled against their ailing mother, was only beginning. Days blended together in a whirlwind of careful observation, sleepless nights, and small victories that seemed almost insignificant at first, until I recognized their true value. Yuki was fragile, but she was eating, lifting her head more each day, her eyes becoming clearer, her movements shifting from instinctual twitches to intentional actions. The kittens, still tiny, were starting to thrive too, their bodies gaining strength, their cries growing louder, more insistent, transforming from desperate whimpers into hopeful calls. It was challenging. I had never experienced exhaustion like this or understood what it meant to structure an entire day around little lives completely reliant on me. But there were moments, unexpected, quiet moments, where I would catch Yuki watching me, her weary golden eyes no longer blank, no longer lost in the fog of illness. Something else flickered in her gaze now, something I couldn't quite name. I had entered that alley expecting nothing more than a peaceful morning with my camera. Instead, I discovered something I never knew I needed, a newfound purpose that I hadn't been actively seeking, but that had found me regardless. Not every narrative concludes with clear answers. I don't know what the future has in store for them or for me, but one thing is clear. That night, when I heard those cries in the alley, I had the option to walk away. I chose to stay. This choice can be pivotal. If this story resonated with you, remember that rescue is more than just saving lives. It's about deciding to stop when others pass by. It's about caring, even when it's not easy. And it's about being present, even when leaving seems more convenient. Not every rescue story ends perfectly, but every act of kindness leaves a lasting impact. If this tale touched you, consider sharing it with someone who believes in second chances. And the next time you hear a cry for help, whether it's a stray animal in an alley or a person who just needs someone to listen, think about how your actions could make a difference. Sometimes, all it takes is one moment of compassion to change a life for the better.